Greetings to all of you. Today I want to talk about the upcoming partial solar eclipse on March 29th. As I've been talking about in previous videos, this month and this year are so powerful astrologically in terms of the energies that we're moving through that are guiding us all into a profound time of transformation as we're moving out of the time of the Kali Yuga this month, that 6,000-year period of being caught in a consciousness of separation and forgetting our connection to source, forgetting what it means to be living in right relationship with each other and all of life, and getting caught in patriarchal power over paradigms. I think this solar eclipse is a wake-up call and is guiding us in how we're moving through this time of change to move out of these paradigms of the past more fully into the Aquarian paradigms of truth and justice and peace and compassion and collaboration and community. And this solar eclipse comes in the context of this powerful eclipse season this month, but also the partial solar eclipse comes on March 29th. And then I want to talk about what it means that it's followed immediately on March 30th by Neptune's first movement into the sign of Aries, and then on March 31st, Venus emerging as a morning star in the eastern sky. But let's start with looking at the chart of this solar eclipse. This partial solar eclipse will come on March 29th and be at 9 degrees of Aries, 0 minutes. Remember that a solar eclipse is a wake-up call. It's calling our attention. And I think the lunar eclipse is often about what we're needing to work with emotionally, while the solar eclipses are calling our attention to how we're living our lives. And I think this is particularly underscored by this solar eclipse being in the sign of Aries. And the meaning of the Sabian symbol for 9 degrees of Aries is teaching new forms for old symbols, or as Dane Rudier describes it, a new dimension of consciousness is discovered. This solar eclipse is activating our moving into higher consciousness and coming to the realization that we need to move into new forms and new ways of being. This solar eclipse is very powerful in that it's a part of this ongoing dance we have with these energies in Pisces and Aries. And I've been in my last few videos talking in depth about the profound meaning of this energy in Pisces and how it relates to the Venus cycle and Venus being in her underworld transformational experience to emerge as a morning star on March 31st at 27 degrees of Pisces, conjunct the North Node, and guiding us into compassion, into remembering the interconnectedness with all that is. But I encourage you to look at where in your chart, what house does this energy of Aries and Pisces land in for you? The later degrees of Pisces and these beginning degrees of Aries. That may be where you are called into your own journey of transformation and of needing to move into new forms, new ways of being, and new ways of seeing and experiencing your life and moving into new forms of consciousness. We are being called into fifth dimensional consciousness, higher consciousness, which is about living from our hearts with love and moving into that understanding of unity consciousness. So I see this energy in Aries, particularly with the conjunction with Mercury. We are being called into new forms of consciousness, new ways of thinking and seeing. The sextile with Pluto is about our movement more fully into these new forms and ways of being that are reflective of the Aquarian age and the Aquarian paradigms. And with the conjunction with Neptune, how are we moving in new directions that are coming from that honoring of that spiritual aspect of ourselves, that we are soul selves having a human experience? And how are we living in right relationship from compassion? If we look at some of the other Kuiper Belt objects and other points at work in this chart, I want to point out the significance in particular of the fact that Salacia is in conjunction with the sun and moon. Salacia is that goddess from Roman mythology who is the goddess of the sea, the goddess of the calm, sunlit waters and the depths of the sea. She was the partner, the wife of Neptune, who was god of the sea and winds and storms. So Salacia signifies how are we in the midst of this time of transformation able to come from that place of being centered and in inner stillness, to hold that sense of our origins from the sea, the wisdom of the sea, but to hold that energy with calm, with peace. Salacia is very symbolic of coming from sensitivity, gentleness, peace, a love of life and of humanity. So I believe this solar eclipse is a wake-up call saying, look at how your life and ways of being, Aries, may be out of balance. How are you moving into new forms and a new dimension of consciousness that is allowing you to live from a place that is coming from your center and coming from sensitivity, peace, love, and compassion? It's also significant that this solar eclipse is opposite the Kuiper Belt object Maki Maki, which is very much about how are we in right relationship with the earth and the resources of the earth. So we're talking about how do we move into ascending consciousness? How do we move into new forms? How do we reclaim what it means to come from compassion, to be moving more fully into the paradigms of the Aquarian age? I think a significant dynamic at the time of this solar eclipse that will continue to be powerfully at work across the next few days as Neptune moves into Aries and Venus rises from the underworld as a morning star on March 31st. We have Chiron and Eris Xena squaring Mars in Cancer. Chiron and Eris Xena have been conjunct and squaring Mars since January 6th and will continue to be in that square with Mars until April 18th, when Mars moves back into Leo. So this shift out of the Kali Yuga is very influenced by this powerful square. I think this conjunction of Chiron and Eris Xena squaring Mars is giving us messages about how we can be moving out of the Kali Yuga into ascending consciousness. As I said, it started in January and will go through mid-April. It's interesting that in January, we also had the opposition of Mars in Leo opposite Pluto in Aquarius. And I talked in an earlier video about that as the transformation of Mars and our being called to align our personal will, Mars, with divine will, Pluto. How are we transforming our ways of acting and those out of balanced energies of Mars coming out of the age of Aries? How are we transforming that to be moving into the Aquarian paradigms? It's significant that that opposition between Mars in Leo and Pluto in Aquarius will reoccur at the end of April, this time with Mars at 3 degrees of Leo, Pluto at 3 degrees of Aquarius. So we're in this context of the transformation of Mars. Then this month, with Venus's journey into the underworld, with her inferior conjunction with the sun, and then a re-emergence as a morning star, is her intense time of death, rebirth, transformation. So we're in this time where Venus and Mars are being reconfigured, transformed. Venus is how we are in relationship with ourselves, each other, with the life around us. And Mars is related to our third chakra. What is our sense of self, our sense of identity, and how we act and interact in the world. So we're not only being called into these new dimensions of consciousness, but really guided in how we're changing our behavior and how we interact with each other. And I believe that Chiron, in its conjunction with Erisina, is supporting us in looking more deeply at what do we need to heal within ourselves. Aries, what is it that we're carrying from the past that we need to clear to be able to integrate that energy of Erisina, which is about daring to move out of conventional ways of being to follow our own unique, creative, spiritual path. Remember, Erisina is that planet that has an orbit that's 44 degrees off the ecliptic. The ecliptic is that line in the sky that the sun and moon and the planets follow. And Eris Xena, which is strong in the charts of artists, innovators, pioneers, writers, strong in the charts of those who dare to step off the beaten track, who are not acquiescing or accommodating the conventional norms and expectations, but are listening to their own inner knowing, following their own unique spiritual path to bring their gifts out in their own individual self-expression. So Chiron is saying it's time to heal those wounds that keep you locked into coping patterns or ways you're constricting your true self to be able to claim that creativity and individuality and those unique gifts that only you have to bring out in the world in this time. And then in their squaring Mars, they're supporting us to Mars and Cancer act from compassion and move forward with new transformed ways of expressing ourselves and living from our sense of will and our third chakra, Mars. So all of these energies are active at the time of this partial solar eclipse, wake-up call, and new moon, telling us that as we wake up, as we heal, as we open to these energies that are transforming us and guiding us into new dimensions of consciousness, we can change our ways of being and more actively move into these Aquarian paradigms of truth and justice and peace and love and compassion and co-create this new world with each other. It's amazing then that this solar eclipse is followed the next day by Neptune's movement into Aries. Neptune on March 30th will be at 0 degrees of Aries, 0 minutes. And now we see the moon in conjunction with Chiron and Erisina and squaring Mars, further activating and supporting that dynamic and calling us to work the emotional process that we need to work, moon conjunct Chiron, to be moving into those new forms and ways of being. But what does it mean that Neptune is moving into Aries? The meaning of the Sabian symbol for 0 degrees of Aries is a woman rises out of the sea and a seal rises up and embraces her. What a powerful image that is for the emergence of new forms, new ways of being, and our movement into new dimensions of consciousness. And I think it's very significant that this 0 degrees of Aries is the image of a woman rising up, being embraced by a seal. Seals and whales, I believe, so hold the wisdom of the earth and our need to come back into right relationship with the earth and the sacredness of the life of the earth. And a woman is rising up, being embraced by and embracing this wisdom of the deep, of the waters of consciousness, the waters of the memories of the earth, the waters that are guiding us in our own healing journey back into right relationship with the sacredness of the earth and of all of life. And how profound is it that Neptune is moving into 0 degrees of Aries, symbolized by this image the day before Venus, symbol of sacred feminine wisdom, rises in the east as a morning star, coming out of her time of transformation and transmutation. So part of what we're seeing in this theme as we move through the eclipse and these shifts with Neptune and Aries and Venus rising is the importance of our reclaiming the reemergence of the wisdom of the sacred feminine. Remember that the Kali Yuga, that 6,000 year period of lower consciousness, is the only time in the 24,000 year precessional cycle that we as humanity get caught in patriarchal power over paradigms. So we're leaving the Kali Yuga. We're allowing those paradigms of patriarchy, of power over, to be deconstructed, to be released, so that we can reclaim the energies of the sacred feminine and come back into balance. Neptune moving into Aries is about, from my perspective, not only the importance of our dreaming new forms into being, Neptune in that sign of Aries, but it's also guiding us in how we dissolve Neptune, those out of balanced paradigms of the age of Aries that are so much about abuse of power, power over, destruction, inequality, injustice, war, division, polarization, greed, corruption. So Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries is supporting us in dissolving those out of balanced patterns, those out of balanced expressions of Mars, the power over paradigm, so that we can integrate this rise of the sacred feminine wisdom and come back into balance, come back into right relationship within ourselves, with each other, with the earth, and all of life. What's so destructive in the power over paradigm that is so characteristic of the patriarchal period is that it gets us caught in a dialectic of perpetrator victim. This is the dialectic that happens, the dynamic that occurs when you're in a paradigm of power over. Then there's someone who has the power, who can misuse that power and be abusive and destructive, controlling, devaluing, and victimize those who are in positions of less power, who then often end up feeling traumatized, victimized, powerless, abused. The problem with this dialectic is that it keeps perpetuating itself. Violence generates violence. This perpetrator victim model not only continues to get passed down from generation to generation and get replayed over and over again with this pattern of re-traumatization, but the roles can reverse. Those who've been victimized may get caught in their own rage and anger, and as they gain some measure of power, become perpetrators themselves. So when we're caught in that dialectic, we're caught in that enmeshment, that we're caught in that interdependence of the perpetrator victim dynamic. And we can then play out those different experiences in our lives or across our lifetimes of being the perpetrator and the victim. And part of what we're seeing in the world right now is some of the people who've lived with victimization can then, as they gain more control, become the perpetrators victimizing others. And we're seeing this in some of the situations of war around the globe. And I believe this Chiron conjunct Erisina squaring Mars and Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries is telling us that we need to heal those wounds from the past to move into new forms. If we're caught internally in that pattern and dynamic of perpetrator victim, then we're either caught in fear or caught in anger and reactivity and retribution. We're either playing out the perpetrator or the victim, and we're caught in that cycle. And I do believe this solar eclipse and Neptune's movement into Aries are saying we need to stop that pattern and step into new paradigms that are about integrating, healing, and integrating the energies of the sacred feminine to move into right relationship. And what does that mean, to move into right relationship? Remember that the sign opposite Aries that helps Aries be in balance is Libra. Libra is the sign that is about being in balanced, harmonious relationships. Libra, the deepest archetypal meaning of Libra is related to that ancient Egyptian understanding of Ma'at. Ma'at was seen as a goddess, but she was actually, for the ancient Egyptians, this principle of cosmic harmony, that everything is meant to be in right balance, right harmony with everything else. Ma'at stood for justice, fairness, balance, harmony, cosmic order. It is about being in tune with the song of your soul self, to be in tune with the song of the spheres, to be living in that interconnectedness and that harmonic that guides us into right action and right ways of loving and right ways of knowing. In ancient Egypt, the leaders, the judges, would often have this symbol of the ostrich feather, which is what Maat was visualized having above her head in images of her in the temples. And the significance of an ostrich feather is it's an extremely light feather, and it represents the energy of purity. It represents the energy of living in right harmony. And it's interesting that the ostrich is a bird that is unable to fly. It moves on the earth. So I think there's also a way in which this ostrich feather is speaking to the importance of our being in alignment with truth and right relationship in how we're living that here on the earth in our day-to-day lives and in our actions. Ma'at and that energy of the ostrich feather being so light was that she calls us into releasing what makes our hearts heavy and weighs us down, such that at the time of death, if our heart is weighed in a scale with the ostrich feather and is carrying all this heaviness of our guilt, our regret, our awareness of our wrong actions, of our ruptures in relationships, our lack of living in right relationship with the earth, if our heart is heavy, then we have to come back into another lifetime to heal and rework that and restore our ability to come back into harmony. But if at the time of death, our heart is as light as a feather, then we're free to move on in whatever way we choose, because we have lived, as the ancient Egyptians would say, by Ma'at, for Ma'at, in Ma'at. We've lived in right harmony, right love, right action, right ways of knowing. And the principles of Ma'at were all about, I take responsibility to not harm the waters of the earth. I have not lied. I have not stolen from others. It's all about that sovereignty of the self to take personal responsibility for my actions and my ways of being. So I think this solar eclipse and this movement of Neptune into Aries is saying this is time for us to heal the trauma from the past so that we can be centered and in alignment with our soul selves. Neptune is reminding us of how to reclaim our soul selves and to release and heal what we need to heal, to be back in balance. And I think that dynamic of Aries opposite Libra is guiding us to come to center. Celacia, the goddess of the calm sunlit seas, is saying, find your way back to center. Get out of this pendulum swing between perpetrator and victim, anger and retribution and abuse and victimization and trauma and wounding and powerlessness. Clear it, heal it, transform it to come back into right harmony and right relationship. And all of this then culminates at the end of March with Venus rising as a morning star, now out from under the beams of the sun in her inferior conjunction with the sun. She emerges and is at her brightest as she emerges as a morning star just before sunrise. Venus emerges now at 27 degrees of Pisces, conjunct the North Node at 27 degrees of Pisces. She emerges in that energy of Pisces, reclaiming our soul selves, reclaiming that energy of compassion and love and the wisdom of the sacred feminine. And she is conjunct Mercury and in an out of sign conjunction with Neptune and conjunct Saturn. And Saturn will be moving into its connection with Neptune and conjunction in the sign of Aries, which I'll talk about in a future video. But Venus is rising in this degree. The Sabian symbol is the harvest moon. We are coming into this expression of compassion and what we can bring out in that light of peace and compassion in the world. And again, it is about the reemergence of Venus and the energies of the sacred feminine. As we're moving out of the Kali Yuga, as we're reclaiming this ascending consciousness, as we're reshaping our ways of being and seeing ourselves and the world and our ways of acting, it's very important that we're redefining how we understand the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine. There's often this description that sacred masculine energy is about action and the sacred feminine and feminine energies are about receptivity. There's an element of truth in that the sacred masculine is associated with Aries and Mars and our actions, and Venus is associated with relationship and how we are in interaction with each other. But I think it's important that we not see the wisdom of the sacred feminine as passive or receptive. The ancient cultures who lived at more advanced levels of consciousness in the pre-patriarchal period saw the energies of the sacred feminine as very active and creative. Think about how they understood the galactic center, that black hole from which all of our galaxy has emerged as the womb of the Great Mother, giving birth to all that is. The ancient cultures saw the stars that never disappear from the sky as the energies of the sacred feminine, the energies of immortality. The sacred masculine was seen as how we manifest and live our lives in this incarnational reality, this time of mortality. So when we reintegrate the sacred feminine with the sacred masculine, it's about come back to that foundational awareness, that sacred feminine wisdom, that we are soul selves, we are a part of infinity, having this human experience in this time of incarnation on the earth plane. And when we keep that sacred feminine wisdom as the foundation, we come in with that awareness of our immortality. We realize that we come from that great mother energy of the cosmos that's given birth to all that is, that holds us in love, that nurtures us, that guides us to stay in alignment with the harmony of the cosmos, with cosmic order, with being in right relationship with all that is. And then we move into the sacred masculine energy of action to live that out and to be protective of that wisdom of the sacred feminine about right action, being in harmony with all that is. And remember, the indigenous cultures had the council of grandmothers who would be leading the community because they would understand this way in which our lives here on the earth plane are in this generational cycle, and that decisions that we make now about how we act and what we do in relationship with each other and the earth need to be in the context of how is this going to impact 7 generations from now. Think about that different orientation compared to the orientation that we're in the patriarchal power over paradigms, where we're just trying to get everything we can now in the moment without thinking about the consequences. And it doesn't really matter how destructive or abusive it is or how divisive it is if I can get what I want. It's such an out of balanced paradigm where the energies of the universe and of this deeper understanding of the sacred masculine and sacred feminine get turned upside down. And I think it's interesting that the Peruvian shamans talk about this as the time of the Pachacuti, when the world is meant to turn upside down. Does that refer to the potential pole shift we may move into? Yes. But I think at the deeper level, what they were saying is these paradigms that have gotten flipped into an upside down pattern need to come back into right relationship, such that we live with that foundational understanding of sacred feminine wisdom to then have our actions and the energies of the sacred masculine be in alignment with that and coming from that wisdom of balance, harmony, right relationship, living in truth and compassion and peace and justice. So this powerful time with the solar eclipse, Neptune's movement into Aries, Venus's rising, are showing us how we can heal and transform, move into higher consciousness, to be seeing the world in different ways and living our lives in different ways and moving more fully into these Aquarian paradigms. And as we really integrate this and take in this deeper wisdom of the sacred feminine that is re-emerging in this time, it will guide us in how to step out of that dynamic of perpetrator victim, how we can release these power over paradigms and move into co-creating a new world together that is about collaboration and compassion and peace and justice. And as we're in this turbulent time of transition and transformation, I hope in an upcoming video to talk more in depth about practically how do we live this out in the midst of this turbulent time. But let me say this for now, that I think if we can really come back into that wisdom of Libra, of the energies of Maat, of how do we allow ourselves in our lives in each day to be aligning with the soul self, to know, is this action coming from right relationship, right harmony, from my heart, from love? Is this action or what I'm doing in alignment with truth? When we're in our connection with our heart and our soul selves, we feel what's true, what's authentic, what's in right balance, right harmony. And we know when we're getting pulled into that dynamic of perpetrator victim, fear, anger, helplessness, reactivity, powerlessness, rage, lack of power, abuse of power. We feel it. We can feel it when we're getting caught in that sense of anxiety and fear and helplessness and hopelessness and pulled into that victim mode. We can feel even in our own lives when we're getting caught in anger, reactivity, impulsivity, destructiveness. Perpetrator. So these energies that we're moving through are helping us come back into stillness, come back into alignment with our witness self, with our soul self, so that we can be living from our center and not getting caught in fear or reactivity, but coming from that alignment with living from the heart in right harmony, right relationship. As that can inform our choices and our day to day lives, it will transform us and support us in emanating that out into all of the interactions that we have in our day to day lives and emanating that energy of love and higher consciousness out into the collective consciousness, into that morphogenic field that can support the shifts for us as humanity as we are being called to leave these destructive paradigms behind and to move into higher consciousness and in to the ways of being of right harmony and right relationship, living from our hearts, from our inner truth with courage. Thank you to all of you in this community who are holding those energies and supporting that healing web that is forming energetically around the globe. Blessings and love to all of you. Blessed be.